Have you read the Walter Isaacson book on Elon Musk?
No, which book?
So Walter Isaacson, he also wrote Steve Jobs, that big white book on Steve
Yeah,
Jobs.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's a great writer. The Steve Jobs book I really liked. He has one that's just called Elon Musk.
It's called Elon Musk. Okay, I'm writing
Both
it
of the
down.
same, they're like big white books, either on
Yeah.
Kindle or audio. I'm doing most of it audio because it's so thick. But man, it's pretty gloves off. And
Okay.
also that dude, I met him early days with Reed, because Reed was my final interview at LinkedIn and
Okay.
PayPal Mafia. This is before Elon had like
Yes.
bazillion dollars, and he's always been kind of on the is Asperger's he has something on the spectrum.
Something I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a little bit on the quirk, but so he had this childhood in South Africa where he like physical abuse, like in the community, like it was just
Wow.
all the things you don't think about,
Yeah.
especially you're like woke Silicon Valley, like why isn't he this and this? Or like the dude had a real life, like
Exactly. A very
it
different
wasn't
life than most that people don't
what
understand
not
yet.
yeah, not coddled Palo Alto, Stanford, that whole thing. First of all, I thought it'd be fun. I wanted to catch up with you.
Yeah.
And I thought one of the things I think I'm trying to do is like if we like capturing those moments real time too is interesting. I don't like boring content, but one of the things that I feel like I'm like the most valuable asset that I have is my network, is the people I know.
Agree. Agree.
And say the same, right? So and I just want to introduce the people I know to the people I know.
I like this. I like this a lot, to be honest.
So it's like also like U.S. presidential election coming up next week. It turns out, I remember 2016 being in the heat of. I was running like talent solutions, globally. It was a $3 billion business, and people around the world were all like cool, and the Americans were all just freaked out. Or
Yes.
well, actually, in that day, the Hillary voters were super confident, and the Trump people, nobody, as far as you could tell, no one ever supported Trump. It was quiet.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're spot on with that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, we hired grief counselors.
Yes, I was in New York, I remember, the day of the election. And I remember everyone like, why this? I'm like, calm down, dude. Like, don't worry.
So you, as a guy who understands the world, like global, it's interesting how narrow. And this is one thing I want to talk about. It's like your
Yes.
view on this, because I've spent quite a bit of time. I have a consulting business, like not on purpose, but the things people deal with that are like, how do you deal with like political conflict inside your companies? It's like, well, why is political conflict? Like,
Exactly. You're spot on. You're spot on with that. It, it's
it's
it's it's crazy.
yeah. Like you and I don't think have ever talked politics. Don't really care, but
Yeah,
we care about the core things to you, core things to me.
exactly.
And I look at the people who we had. That company work. I work with a lot of Jewish people and a lot of Muslims, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever had a debate with any of them about any of the strife in the Middle East, and yet they're both very proud of the things they did. And I don't. I mean, maybe it was there. I don't think internally we had a culture where that conflict existed
I
too
agree.
much.
I will say, like, I see it here in Greece, that piece of the puzzle. Like,
Oh
people will not want to have that like political conflict about the politics in Greece. They'll want to have that political conflict of what's happening outside of Greece.
yeah,
Whereas
sure.
like in the States, you didn't really hear about it because it was almost like,
Mhm.
okay, we all get together, we're here to work, we're here to get our job done. Okay, you're whatever belief, this and that, we're here. Everyone basically has the same belief, and everyone thinks like the government sucks. Not me. I think it's the best freaking prime minister that we've had in Greece, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but they're trying to push the issues here elsewhere,
Yeah.
whereas it's a different like mentality. I've noticed.
Well, it's interesting because it's we should probably go like a little bit from the start. Like so, Greece has a thing. That's a part of the world that has so much depth in history in a civilized, what we would consider today first world
Correct. Yeah.
country. Arguably, Greece was one of the first.
Yes.
and especially intellectually, right? So you have thousands of years of intellectual discourse and pretty civil disagreement where everything wasn't settled with the sword.
Correct. Correct.
Like the foundation of most of the Western world thinking was Greek and then later Roman, right? And some Egyptian. Their perspective, I can't even imagine the Greek perspective on, I mean, England, let alone the US.
Anything, Wade, anything. Like it's I'm gonna say it's gonna sound weird. It's probably Greece is Greece. It's not Europe at all.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the whole EU is fake, right? There's no
Yes.
such yeah.
And like I've noticed that being here, it's like you have to argue your point. They don't want to listen to your point because
Mm-hmm.
they have a different perspective of life. And I see it as a Greek American. I grew up in America, born and raised Chicago, Greek parents. So I am Greek by root, but American by thought process. Here, they view it
Interesting.
very
Thought
different.
process. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so carry on with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So in the business world, for example, here, like I came over to Greece. I told you this from the day one. I've always wanted to move to Europe. I've always wanted to move to Athens, and I got the opportunity to work for a startup here. They wanted someone to open the U.S. market. I'm like, great. I worked in the
Mhm.
U.S. They wanted a native English speaker. Ding, 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 ding. Hit all the bells. But once you're in the business, they're like, no, why are you talking this? Why are you thinking this? Why are you doing that? We've always done it this way. And you try to
Mhm.
do like the sales process like we do with clients, like, no, these are your three reasons, these are the issues
Mhm.
that you have. You're drag the people through the glass kind of thing. And like, no, why would you think about that for us? We're better than that. We're Greeks. So they have like that
Mhm.
history and pride piece that they don't want to give up, but they also don't want to change. They say they want to change. And I'm seeing it even more so now that I've been interviewing. They
Mhm.
want to interview the American, they want to interview the tech guy, but they don't want to give the tech guy a chance because he's going to come in as a bull in a china shop with the American mindset and shift what
Yeah.
Greece is. It's
So
a
I'm going to
very
go to I'm
weird
going to go
juxtaposition.
human psychology first. So if you broaden out, what you just said actually sounds so much like almost everyone I know, including myself, where in human nature, we want to believe that we're open minded, and the concept of what used to be a positive, like the term liberal, used to be a positive term. Of like we're open minded and liberal in our thinking.
Yeah.
Today it's taken this like super sort of woke anti movement,
Yep.
but like liberal actually used to be really good, right? And even conservative was also good. You
Yes.
conserve the things, you keep the things, you maintain the things, you help make them better, and both of those were good terms.
Exactly.
Now, but do you think what you just mentioned is like, okay, this has worked so well for so long? So belief systems, religions, practices, diets, all of it.
Hmm.
There's something to that, right? There's something to don't break everything. Like
Correct.
if you, there's an old saying, well, old, relatively in my life, grandparents, great grandparents, um, do not be the first to do the new untried,
Yes.
nor the last to lay the old aside. And so there's that mindset. And then there's also like innovation does not happen in that mindset, right? So also,
100%.
I'm right. Those people over there, they got it wrong. It's interesting hearing you say that because as a person who has been an American expat,
Yeah.
Americans always, almost always, try to do business in an American way in other countries.
Correct.
I've been the guy, the American expat they send back. Usually that fails, right? Because well, in China, but what do you see? So how do you get past that sort of? You're coming from a part of the world there, what is you could credibly say, okay, that mindset has worked for thousands of years. One of the largest, or sorry, one of the longest living sort of process and
Correct.
mentalities in the history of developed civilization. So
It's funny
long term,
because
you can't argue with it. Short term, yeah, the world is going this fast. So keep
that's the issue
promising.
here because they know things have worked for so long. They want it to be over here. They want to move as fast as the Chinas, the USs of the world,
Mhm.
but they don't want to put the work in between. And
Mhm.
it's very much instilled in Greek culture where it's a phrase that we say. It's like mama and baba, mom and dad are going to do everything. because of years of struggle, years of war, the kids or now parents or whatever have been coddled over the ages. So they're always waiting for someone to do it. So in this sense, in the business world here, they're waiting for someone else to do it, or the company, example, started to get acquired by a German company or a UK company that's going to have that mentality to then push them in that way. Like example, COVID here was the best thing to ever happen because it forced the government to become digital. And now everything moves faster.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. I needed a paper from the IRS saying that my tax residency is in the US. It took 6 months for me to get that paper. The same paper I got in Greece in 10 minutes. So in that case, like a catastrophe, a big catastrophe needs to happen in this country and Greece for something to move fast. Otherwise,
however, what you just said about the U.S. three-letter acronym organizations is those who have reverted back to the bureaucracy that has served them well. Like anyway, we won't get into that because I'm like, oh my gosh. This is after having lived in Europe and then come back. So living in Europe, I'm like, this is the most bureaucratic thing ever. I came back to the US, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's worse here.
That's what I explain to people, and I'm like, they're like, no, it's what we see in the movies. That's the US. I'm like, no, go live, and you will see the differences. And I think that's the issue.
Public sector, right?
Yes, in public sector.
Public sector, the DMV, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the insert thing here, HHS. Private sector, what I find is that, you and I have lived this.
Yeah.
When technology is ahead, when innovation is so far ahead of regulation, it goes fast.
Agree.
When regulation catches up, every industry that you and I have been in did something that they weren't sure how to regulate. Like if you look at cryptocurrency, if you look at social media, there wasn't any even PayPal, right? Like financial, Uber, Airbnb. Like, it's kind of illegal a little bit.
Yeah, you're right.
Regulated. And then when the regulations come, down she goes, like Silicon Valley Bank.
Yes.
Let's zoom back a little bit. So you and I met, we first met like in Chicago probably,
we actually met, the first time we met was in Paris.
We met, okay, yeah, talk me through that. When you were living in Chicago.
I was living in Chicago. I was an analyst, and they had hired a team out in Dublin, and there was a GAM dinner offsite something in Paris, and they invited me to come over.
Yes. Okay. Let's build to that because your career path here is really interesting. Like so many people have this imposter syndrome that I find because they believe whatever career they're in, there's a certain path. There's a place you grow up. There's a school you go to. There's people your parents know, and then you go down this path.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't that. You were not that. Like, kind of what's the journey that got us there? And then from that, like, because by the time I met you, we both had a similar mindset, I think, we were not entrenched in a certain pattern, I guess.
Correct.
So, yeah.
100%. So like for me, okay, immigrant parents. So I had no connections. I had no one knew corporate. My dad was basically like, go to school and get a good job with insurance and vacation because we had a restaurant and he couldn't leave and he had to pay insurance up the wazoo. So I got my degree I got my degree in finance and marketing. Then I was working at a bank. Then the crash happened in 2009. I went back to school for my MBA. One of my professors, Adam Garcia, I will never forget this, in internet marketing, was like, hey, are you looking for a job? I go, yes, actually. I have no connections and it's been super hard and I'm graduating soon. He goes, I know someone. Happens to be Craig Budis' best man. He's like, they're hiring someone for an analyst role at LinkedIn in Chicago. Are you interested? I go,
this is right out of school?
This is as I was about to graduate.
Yes, great.
From my MBA, yeah. So I interviewed then with David Cohen, Chris Kelleher, and Craig Budis, and they said, okay, you're green, we can mold you, you're on board. And to be honest, that changed my life completely because I wasn't in white collar. I had no idea about the corporate world. Like, I wanted it. That's what I went to school for, but I didn't know which way to go. So
by getting into 1 second, that context for that is really interesting because, timing, human interactions is so important.
Yeah.
So you had three fantastic people, right? People who were part of what shaped LinkedIn's organization, sales like that. They'd had the back, but also David Cohen, whose father was in the restaurant industry, like very successful in that, understood it, and Dave was brilliant, right? So the
Yeah.
analyst part, they also knew we needed that part because the sales organization couldn't do it. You had Chris Kelleher, who was like fantastic enterprise salesperson. He'd been in telecom, he'd done all those kind of things. So he was coming in, he knew the game, he knew what needed to happen, what we needed. And they got Craig Goodes, who had the heart of it. Like Craig probably had the heart of the business more than anyone I know. And I can't imagine a better trio of people to be humble enough to know what they needed and also strong enough to like make good choices. So, but now if you would have gone through a hiring panel in one of the big 5 tech companies in the world today with that background, would you have made it? Would you get in?
100%
Yeah, same.
no.
Yep.
No. So that literally changed it for me because I didn't know how to talk either. Like I remember David Cohen telling me that. He goes, I could tell you went for your MBA because of the way you're speaking to us. He goes, I could also tell that you didn't come from a white collar family because you have a different vibe. You don't have that, I'm going to try to backstab the person to jump over the other person. You want to do your job well, and you're going to roll up your sleeves and do whatever you got to do. You have the restaurant mentality, basically, because everyone's a client, everyone's could be business, and that's what's going to keep your family fed, basically.
And that the DNA of our culture at that point, we didn't have any signs up on the wall or anything, right? I mean, we had some sort of crude things right now. I think we had kind of a no asshole policy was about it.
Yes.
But those ideas, that's one thing I remember early on is, especially in the go-to-market organization, we believed, and we didn't have actually, I think we had 11 engineers up until about almost $1 billion of revenue. So we didn't have like a huge product development team.
Yeah.
So we knew we needed insights, and it wasn't like we could, so and most of those insights were on the consumer business. So, and in the field, that's fantastic. And I think Mike Gamson gets a lot of credit for that cultural, mindset. Dan Nye, actually, that nobody talks about, who was the CEO prior, and Jeff, and then you come into that environment. What this reminds me of too is like that was a great hire. So it's not what someone has done; it's what they can do. We're all rolling the dice.
100%.
We didn't know that team. I remember hiring a guy who had been selling commercial floor scrubbers to commercial grocery stores. Another guy who used to be my boss who had a staffing business. We had people who were non-traditional coming into that organization.
Yes.
Consultants, lawyers in sales. And they were like, wow, we need somebody who really is an analyst. So, and then you're green coming out of school. So, all right, you get hired. And a relatively new team, right?
Yeah. Well, I was the first analyst in North America. We were trying to figure out what we needed to do. There was one other guy in San Francisco, another person in New York. So it was fresh. We were trying to figure it out, basically. And it was a little scary in the beginning because it's like, okay, I'm new to corporate. We got to figure it out. But it's that mentality I had from my dad, who was like, okay, you're going to figure it out in one. There's a phrase in Greek, basically, like "padei parhilisi." There's always a solution for everything. You just have to
say it again. Say it again.
In Greek, it's "padei parhilisi." There's always a solution for anything.
Love it.
And he's right. It may not be right here in front of me, but if you peek back the finger, if you dig a little in the crevice, you'll find it. You'll figure it out. You just have to be willing to do that. And I think because I was green and because I almost felt like I needed to prove that I was a good hire, that you did take a chance on the restaurant kid, basically. I was like, we're going to do it. Let's find a way to bring in business. Let's find a way to figure out an ROI story. Let's figure a way to get in front of these clients in the way that we know best, basically.
When was that? What year was that?
2011.
2011. So, yeah, it's funny because I don't know how you thought about this coming from the business you came from. LinkedIn was the biggest company I ever worked for. I was coming from Omaha. I was employee 292, but I think there's around 200 people because of attrition.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I look back in my mind. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like working for this big company.
Wow.
So, yeah. But, so how'd you deal with the corporate world? So you were used to dealing with entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs and people who were hustling and stuff.
Yeah.
Like was it good? Like
the best thing ever.
You adjusted well. Yeah.
I adjusted well because I'm a guy as left brain, as creative as I can be, and I am. I need
Mm-hmm.
structure. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, the corporate world essentially gave me structure. It gave me the resources, and it gave me the learnings to learn from different people and different perspectives. So for me,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, so you bring up something. This is recent discussions, top of mind. That a lot of people have this mindset, and this is generational. But it turns out, going back as far as my great grandfather, I've learned that this is their generation too.
Yeah.
We're different. I don't want top-down management. I don't want to be told what to do. I think, and everybody says that they don't want to be told what to do, and yet there's a large group of people. Maybe they don't want to be dictated to, but structure, organization, direction, feedback. There's a psychologist who I talked to a few weeks ago, around the corporate psychologist, that said if you, especially a frontline worker, if you give them a whole bunch of expectations at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, you don't check up and you don't ask them questions, you don't actually check in on them.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, they become less engaged and less interested in the company, and their morale is lower because they believe you don't care.
Yes.
Versus the person who at the end of the day says, okay, how do we do? And it sounds a little harsh, it might be in your face a little bit, but I got to step it up, I got to care. And they feel like somebody cares about them. And it's interesting you say that structure, because like remote work, there's a lot of people who don't work well in a less structured environment. So interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny because like for me, for the remote work piece, because I've learned that in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
like I prefer remote work over anything now, to be honest. But I've also learned how to structure my day in that sense. I know that I can still go to the gym in the morning and I can still take an 8 a.m. call if need be. Or I'll go to the gym at 7, but if there's a call that needs to be done at 5, I will do it. I'll structure my days in the way that work for me and for the business. But you learn that over time, I feel like.
Yeah. But and also you had people with outcome was everything, right? So
Yes.
I know I saw a message from you after midnight, right? Because stuff has to happen.
Exactly.
But I think that the whole distance is earned. We talked about that, right? The when somebody's producing, I don't care if you're standing on your head in the middle of Mexico City and it's 3 a.m. when it happens. And that's one of the things I think that you gained so much credibility in your career for, was what needs to be done. If you don't know how to do it, like, where can I learn that and go get it done?
Exactly.
Yeah. And maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it is perfect, but it's done.
It's done. And it's not even just in career. Like I noticed it here, for example, like
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Greece. I've never lived in Greece. I bought a flat in a new building. And in Greece, not everything is basically like electricity, internet, nothing comes easy. You got to figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. They voted me as board president, the guy who's never lived in Greece, to figure it out. And I figured it out in a week. And they're like, wait. What did you do? How did you get this so fast? I go, because I called here. I figured the way I need to get energy so I can then live in my place. I also need internet. Like I knew where to call. Yeah. But it goes back to the cultural aspects here where they're waiting someone else to do it. Sure. So they're like, the Americans coming in, figuring it out, like, you got to do it. You got to figure it out in some way, shape, or form.
Specifically, you're being a Chicago entrepreneur.
Exactly.
Hey, let me figure out what I got to do here, But that's legit. I mean, that's fantastic. So okay, so then we met. So you're in the business, and we met in Paris.
Yeah.
What was the event?
It was a GAM. I think it was either an offsite or a QBR. I think it was QBR actually. It was a GAM QBR.
So like a quarterly business review.
Yes.
For our people who ran the global accounts. So our biggest sellers around the world got together every quarter to review things. And it used to be kind of stories of how things went. What we're looking for was like, actually, what about insights, like data insights, which is where you came into the picture, right?
Exactly. So I was invited to kind of showcase how we did it in the States. What can we bring to light? What are new ideas that we were doing? So that's where I came to Paris. For me, it was something cool, something different for me. It was like, okay, I've never done international travel for work. Like, great. Like, they're putting me to the table. Like, it gave me confidence, gave me the boost that I needed to know that, no, I can do this. So it was one of the best things for me because it's not like my dad knows the industry. So it's not like I could get like that, like pat on the back from my dad. He's like, oh, good job. But it's different coming from like people in the industry that that praise for lack of a better word.
How did you? Because you bring up something interesting about, I think validation, right? Where validation can come. Some people get it as a child. Some don't. Some get it in school. Some get it in sports or music or extracurricular, and some get for family. Family businesses. A lot of times it is you getting the approval of your parents. You're getting approval of the more senior person. Some cultures are very top down. It has to be the senior person. That environment wasn't so top down. It was more peer oriented. Well, a little bit of both. And I find it interesting that you were inspired by like the recognition of what you were doing by, I guess, by the people who were most impacted by your work.
Yeah, even you inspired me, to be honest, because I'm like, here's an American, he's in Europe, he's working for a tech company. Like, this is what I want eventually. So like meeting you that day, it's like, okay, this can happen. You can have an open mind for things like that. So that helped me along the way. It's like even that, just like situations, experiences, and everything else that was huge for me that I had never known beforehand.
Well, so that's that. I'm glad to hear you say that, because not because of me, but I think that's what I think. Usually, we look for like almost every time when I've tried to do something, it's like, who's done this before? Has someone done this before? And sometimes, like maybe someone's done it, and I like to learn from But yeah, so it was I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, which is like being hired at LinkedIn from Omaha, Nebraska, a whole different story. But and I only speak one language, like moderately well.
Yeah.
And also, I'd never been to Europe.
Wow.
We sold house, cars. We kept our kids. We moved to London. Never been there. Didn't know. Like, no idea. And so I never traveled anywhere except like I've been to Canada like a couple of times, Mexico a couple of times. Doesn't work, right? And I grew up. I was on my first airplane when I was 18 years old. So that was just something. But no one asked me if I'd done it. They asked me if I could do it. Sure.
Yeah.
Also, what's the timeline? How long are we going? What's the timeline? Is it a return ticket? No idea. To me, that was just right.
Wow.
And I was, my understanding, I think I misunderstood, but my understanding is I was going over there to sort of launch. We needed to get outside the U.S. We need to have we're in U.S. and Canada, have a presence. And in my mind, I was going there. What I realized, I had a boss. Like on the plane there, I realized I have a boss and I have a boss's boss.
Yeah.
And of course, ego. I'm like, what? Turns out I was so smart. But yeah, you know what? But we, in a couple of years, we got into 12 countries. We did like 0 to 120 million or something like that, because they're just great people, and humans are humans, and man, did I make mistakes. But I also knew, and I think you figured this out pretty quickly too, that when you realize it's not about me, you're not limited by your limitations.
Correct.
Really what you have to do is assemble the team. Yeah, I don't know if you remember. I remember we first, 2011. That's when we. I think that's when we opened Dublin, where we started. But our SMB, our inside sales, and those kind of folks there. And I remember myself and Ariel Eckstein and Brian Frank doing 12 interviews in a day, or we hired. I remember more than that. Hired a bunch of people in one day.
Yeah.
I remember Gordon Tobin, because he was a boxer. I'm like, yeah, you're good. But fast forward in 2011, I remember sitting in that office. It was right around the time of this offsite. And I was listening, and I think at the time we spoke maybe a dozen languages or something. I speak one. And you know how I used to like to shadow salespeople, listen to the calls and feedback.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't help these people in the way that I thought my job was.
Correct. Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, that's not my job. My job is to create an ecosystem where they can thrive. And therefore, I just need the team together, and then just the light bulb hit. Like, same thing with why we brought you into the organization. It was like, oh, I don't need your skills. You have. I already know what I think. Right? So that's one thing I really liked about our relationship was, and then between 2, 3, 4, 10 of us, like, okay, who's missing around this table?
Yeah.
And so and you got started there, and you made an impact pretty quickly, because we were so hungry for just the work you were doing, and that data sold. I mean, the data that we provided to our customers, because we were dealing with recruiting, which was kind of a feely thing back then.
Exactly.
Post and pray, hope the right people come. Remember the interview feedback was like, I kind of liked them.
Mm-hmm.
And where's your best source of recruiting? Like, I think like that was how we got the answer. Like, no,
I will never forget that. I will never forget those.
yeah, but you did a good job of not putting anyone down, that I recall.
No, you know what? You can't. You can't. Everyone's learning. Everyone's a person in the way I view it. You got to keep going. You got to be positive, and that's it.
And one thing I want to bring out here that I think is a strength of yours, and I think you see it elsewhere also, is like the ability to make data-driven decisions without being a bot. And I think increasingly right now, almost everything that I'm asked to speak on the last 4 or 5 years has to do with automation. You go back to like my great grandmother's era, where it's like they automated agriculture, went from a horse to a tractor. Like, we're gonna lose jobs.
Yeah.
We did. Manufacturing, there's robots. Banking, my dad was in banking. Like, there's computers. Computers are going to take their jobs. They're going to go to 4-day work weeks. Probably everybody's going to go paperless society. They're saying this in the 70s,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
But
true.
people have always been afraid of that. AI right now, everyone's like, AI is going to take my job. I'm like, well, I hope so. Like the parts you hate, like, but you have this insight. I think you have this idea that data and sort of if this then that is incredibly empowering, but also it's not everything, or else everything would be done with a spreadsheet. Like, is that something did you develop that, or you kind of have that intuitive nature to you, or how do you do that?
I feel like you have to understand that not everything is 1, 2, 3. Like you can see 1, 2, 3, but there's always different perspectives behind it. So you have to understand that you have the data, you have the insights, but how you interpret it can be completely different dependent on the person's background, the person's culture, what organizations they're in. So you have to understand that yes, automation, quote unquote, AI can help make efficiencies, essentially, which is great. But you still need that other piece of the puzzle that will understand how to, for example, how am I going to sell this glass to a Greek compared to an American? Like that piece of the puzzle, I think, is still
Much
so
slower.
important. Exactly. Like that's the piece of the puzzle that I think is still so important, and I think that's something that we did bring into the analyst framework was we have all these data points, we have all these insights, but we need to tell the story, we need to build the narrative because people want to hear what to do with them as well. You can say, hey, here's XYZ, but they're going to be like, okay, what's next? You have to be able to guide them through that process. And I think that for me was even a learning for me because I may have thought it, but once you hear people actually understanding it and being like, hey, no, actually, this does make sense. Like, what else can we be doing? Where should this go? Where's this going to take us? That's what keeps your brain going and keeps you kind of on knife's edge in a good point, in a good way, essentially.
How many times have you made decisions in your life on the phone with somebody? One of you is going through security at an airport, and you get down to boom, 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 quickly, right? So,
yep, I agree.
But this is something very timely with almost every industry, every occupation right now. Is automation going to destroy jobs? And I think that people, the mindset you have is like, actually, it makes it better. So if salespeople said, well, I think kind of prior to me, my generation prior to me, maybe those who were like doing sort of at least B2B sales, maybe the 80s or early 90s stuff, there was a lot of sort of golfing, smoking cigars, kind of like that.
Yes.
And there was I just know him, we both went to Harvard. And then it went to a little bit more sort of charisma. And then it went to sort of data. And so that part I think is really important. And then the other thing though is integrity. So, you and I have one foundational thing. It's like, transformation, integrity, collaboration, humor, results. Humor is my favorite. But especially I think about this in political times. This year's been fascinating around the world with, Argentina, Brazil, France, like all the political. It's very tempting to take data, to have the story pre-told and find data to support your story.
Correct.
And over time, you can do that, and mass media's done that forever. Politicians have done it.
Yes.
But you can't build real relationships like that If your spouse does that, if your kids do that, you never trust them, right? I mean, that's not good.
Yep.
And this is where I'm going with that is integrity in doing those things, because it's, and especially you worked with a lot of go-to-market, sales, marketing, and recruiters, all pretty good at spinning things. I know that I could tell you if you put one foot in hot red coals and the other foot in an ice bucket, statistically, you're perfectly comfortable.
Statistically, yes.
However, you probably had a lot of experience with it. Where somebody wants a certain result, they want to tell a story.
Correct.
And certainly you can find data to tell that story. How do you balance that, though, with starting with the data and getting to the answer? The scientific method. The scientific method is question your hypotheses and find out what's true. Like, how do you find truth versus we all have so much bias of what we want the answer to be? Increasingly easier and easier. AI makes it really easy.
Yeah.
How do you think about the integrity of not manipulating stats, data, insights to make these decisions?
The way I think about it is at the end of the day, I think we all want what's best for the client. And I think for me, the way I think about it is what is that one piece of the puzzle that your client or whoever it is in life is talking about, is harping on. Because if you have these conversations with them and you build these trusts with these people, you'll hear repeat themes. So, that's the number one. And then you have to find the data that essentially stems off of that. So I'm one that I never want to manipulate the data. I want to say what's truthful. I want to say what's right. This is what's going to get you to the next level. And basically, you're telling me how to get there, but you may not know how to put two and two together because you don't have that extra piece of the puzzle. I have the extra piece of the puzzle. I'm connecting the dots, essentially. So I'm hearing from you. I have the data, and then I can maneuver in the way that makes sense for you.
And how do you, if you're the person we're all trying to influence others, right? Leadership is essentially influence. And I would say most go-to-market functions and business function or even government functions are influence. What if the real answer is they shouldn't buy from you? They shouldn't make the same decision you make. You maybe should change your decision. But using sales as an example, you supported large sales organizations, millions and millions of dollars of deals. Somebody who's carrying commission kind of does not want to be told, probably this is not right for them. But, there's that balance between, of course, doing the right thing and saying no, like this isn't right for you. Especially if you have a little bit of pressure, either from top down or for someone else. How do you manage that? Because I know you were in the middle of this quite a bit, I'm sure.
I've told clients sometimes that this is probably not the best solution right now. I always dub it as at this moment, because it may be better for them in a year's time, in 2 months' time, in 3 months' time, when they're ready. So I think it's all coming to terms with, is the client ready to make the shift? And understanding that solutions are not always dead. It just may take a little bit more time. Sometimes management may not want to hear that, but I think they've come to terms to understand that no, because if we do something now and then it churns, it's going to be red for us, essentially at the end. So I was fortunate, we were fortunate at LinkedIn that a lot of times the management did understand that piece of the puzzle. So they were okay with extending a deal or making it a smaller one for a bigger one later on, kind of thing.
Well, I think that's consistency is built by trust over time. How many times did Jeff say that? Trust over time. And also that person, the buyer for us, I think on average was in their typical buying role for 18 to 24 months.
Correct.
And they were going to go to a different company and they said, what, I trust you because you told me I don't need that much. I need this, or you told me like, you're being too weak and you go bigger.
Yeah.
I also felt that almost every, and this is every organization I work with, almost every either great leader, salesperson, great recruiter, the big ones are willing to walk away. Like no is their second favorite answer. Maybe it's slow and expensive.
Yeah.
And I think, but that's really helped. It also, got in the middle of that. Well, I think one of the reputations that you have certainly built in my mind is credibility of like enthusiasm. And yeah, you can figure it out. You can make stuff happen, but not at all costs. It's not whatever it takes.
Agreed.
It's what needs to be done, doing the right thing. And like I've never heard or seen of you selling out your reputation, for something. Even when we were a public company, earnings calls, whatever. I think that insight of like, the only time the stock price matters is the day you buy and the day you sell.
Yeah.
Good one. All right. Why don't we? I know you have another commitment, so
Yes.
let's do a part two. I think we maybe need, we know 20 minutes. I'd love to get to the the journey kind of from that role, and then
Of course.
what you're doing now, and then also, what your current elevator pitch is and kind of that.
Yeah.
This is fun though, man. It's great to catch up.
This is fun. You too. It's good to see your face, honestly.
Sounds good.
We'll figure
Thanks,
it out.
buddy. Have a great night. Yep. See ya. Bye.